Good evening, and welcome to our second week of our Black History classes here at Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. Second week that Prophetic Voices, a coalition of concerned clergy, is sponsoring Black History classes at our various churches throughout the community and the parish. I'm very grateful that you have taken the time to come this evening, and I trust that you will be edified as you were on last week. Let's bow our heads, please, in a word of prayer. Lord God, we thank you for this opportunity to assemble ourselves together. We thank you for the purpose of our coming as we seek to gain knowledge and be enriched by this teaching experience about our history. We ask, your God, your blessings upon Dr. Samuels. We ask your blessings upon each person who is sharing with us tonight, whether they are doing so in person or sharing with us virtually, that they might leave this experience better than they were when they came. We lift up the needs of our brothers and sisters, our sick and our shut-in. We ask, your God, that you would bless them, that you would intercede on their behalf as only you can. Stand with them, by them, and for them, where they have not the strength to stand for themselves. Help us now to use this time in the wisest manner possible. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen. Again, just a couple of housekeeping things, and I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Samuels. It is important that we do this, and it is important that we continue to solicit your support in what it is that we are doing. As we said on Sunday, as we said last week, if we don't know from whence we have come, then we have no proper idea about the potential of where we can go. I truly wish that more of our churches in this community were doing what we are doing. It's just 5 of us, 5 churches that are doing this. There should be more. But I'm grateful for those churches that are working. I'm grateful for those who are present. I want to make an appeal to parents to make sure that your children are here and are a part of this experience. You took them to the parade. Will you bring them to a place where they can learn something about their heritage and about their culture? And I guess that's about all the fussing I'm going to do. If you did not get last week's notes, we have some extras here this evening. You can pick them up. There are notes here for you to gather this evening. And if there are those of you who are watching us who would like the notes, if you would send to me your email address, send it to fredjeffsmith@gmail.com. We'll make sure that the notes are submitted to you. Without further ado, let us receive Dr. Albert Samuels. Dr. Samuels.
Thank you. I can hear me, right? Well, good evening. Good evening. It's good to be here. It's good to see so many of you all back after Mardi Gras and on Valentine's Day. We're going to talk a little Black history. I want to, like any professor, we'd like to kind of review what we talked about. review. Testing. Okay. Like any professor, we like to kind of sort of review what we talked about last time. Our last week we talked about the centrality of slavery. We said that slavery formed the basis for the early prosperity and social development of the 13 colonies. That, in fact, it would not racism is the most enduring legacy of slavery. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. We also talked about how slavery, I'm sorry, that slave owners took the Bible out of context as a means to justify the institution that they created, but God is still good. Okay? And finally, the slavery and racism really reminds us that this world is not our home. So that's just a kind of an overview of what we did last time. Okay, what I'd like to do today is to talk about the tradition of black resistance, the tradition of black resistance. We could, and I like to start with sort of defining white supremacy. Because ultimately that's what we're dealing with. It's this problem of white supremacy. White supremacy is the ideology that the attributes that and characteristics that are purported. And I want to emphasize purported because sometimes it's not true, but the attributes that are purported to be associated with whiteness are inherently superior to those who are non-white. White supremacy basically says that whiteness is the measure of all things. And consequently, those who have whatever characteristics are associated with whiteness, okay, are therefore entitled to monopolize the dominant positions in society, whether it be in politics, whether it be in the economy, whether it be in culture, or any other institutions. The characteristics that are supposedly associated with whiteness entitle them to dominate. That's the doctrine of white supremacy. White supremacy also oftentimes works in concert with patriarchy, its evil twin, and religious bigotry. So they kind of form a satanic tag team that basically dominates the rest of society. So that's how I want to think when we think about white supremacy. A couple of things we need to understand about white supremacy. White supremacy is inherently irrational. It is inherently irrational. In fact, in order to be a white supremacist, you first of all must be willing to believe things about the world that are not true. You must be willing to believe, first of all, that there's this thing called racist in the first place. That's not true. You must believe that whiteness is superior to that. That's not true, and on it goes. You must be willing to believe things about the world that are not true. But it's worse than that. You must also be willing to hold on to these ideas, even in the face of incontrovertible evidence to the contrary. Okay? So, white supremacy is actually impervious to evidence of its falsity. It attempts to explain away uncomfortable truths. Now, sometimes when somebody black achieves, sometimes white supremacy will say, well, you're special, you're an exception. But we got a problem with the rest of you all. It's the rest of y'all that got a problem. So some of us know what it's like to be viewed as the exceptional black. Oh, we don't mean you. But So they can hold on to the idea that there can be some exceptions. At the same time, still think that the rest of us are inferior. So sometimes they view us as exceptional. Or other times when black people achieve, they must have cheated. You couldn't have actually earned your way into this institution. You must have got here through affirmative action. Or you didn't actually earn enough money to afford this car that you're driving. You must have stolen it. Or you must be doing drugs because you can't possibly have earned this. So white supremacy is fundamentally irrational. It's impervious to evidence. And those who live in it are susceptible to appeals to fear and rage. Because see, if you are told or you believe that you are inherently superior to other folk, you have to try to make that so. And so you are threatened by other people's success. Especially when people succeed who aren't supposed to succeed. When people succeed in spite of the barriers you put in their place. Something is wrong in their mind, something is wrong with that. So they are constantly susceptible to appeals to fear and to rage. Often the response to black success is white rage. So those are some fundamental things that we need to understand about white supremacy, before we begin, because this is ultimately what we're up against. Okay, and so let's start now that we understand what we're up against. Let's talk about how black people have resisted. How have black people dealt with white supremacy? We have a complicated relationship with America. You think that's fair to say? Yeah. We have a complicated relationship with America. If you think about the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, all these other symbols of America. This idea that we're welcome to immigrants. Give me your tithe, your poor, your huddled masses who yearn to be free. But for black people, sometimes this promise of liberty sounds like a joke. Du Bois had a word for this, this idea of double consciousness. Some of you are familiar with, The Souls of Black Folk, with one of the classic works that I think is required reading. When I read it, I kind of say it to my students at Southern sometimes, you should not be able to graduate from this university and you have not read Souls of Black Folk. And folks don't, of course a lot of people don't believe or follow my advice, but I'm kind of used to that. But this idea of, he's talking about this two-ness, this idea of being both Negro and America, this sense that, I don't have my own country, or I love America, but sometimes America don't love me back. Like a lot of times, America doesn't love us back. We are the only people who didn't ask to come here. Now there are other people who might have got tricked into coming here, but I mean, as a group, We are the only people who didn't ask to come here. And so the question then is, now that we're here, what do we do about it? Now that we're here, what do we do about it? That existential question is really where black politics begins. Since we are the only people who didn't ask to come, what do we do about it? And so what we're going to talk about is the idea that black people have not always been of one mind as to what we do about the fact that we didn't ask to come here. And now we got to figure out what to do about it. So that's what I want to. That's what we want to kind of. That's kind of how I want to frame what we want to do for the next few minutes. And so what I like to propose this idea is that, first of all, that actually is something I want to refer to as the black political tradition. There's a black political tradition. That, in other words, we actually have one. And this is kind of one way of thinking about it, but and you can quibble with the terms. But some black people have basically argued that we have the same rights as anybody else. In fact, we probably have more claim than anybody else to some of these rights. And so consequently, this is our country. There's nowhere else supposed to go. Africa's too far away. You know, we are Americans, and consequently, we deserve the same rights as everybody else in this country, and we deserve an equal chance at what we call the American dream, et cetera, et cetera. That, you know, we're going to call that, for lack of a better term, assimilationism. This idea that this is our country. This approach oftentimes, for example, utilizes America's own ideals. It quotes from, oftentimes leaders quote from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and other documents. It utilizes the laws and simply says that this should apply to us as well. That's what, you know. Now, sometimes people may disagree about the best method within this tradition to accomplish this goal. You know, if you think about the arguments between, say, Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. You know, you could argue that they had essentially this particular goal, but they had some pretty sharp disagreements about how to get there. So one approach says, this is our country. It belongs to us just as much as anybody else, that we've contributed as much or even more than other people. So we have just as much right to this country as anybody else. And then that's one idea. But another idea questions, do we really want to integrate into this? You know, it's kind of black nationalists or black separatism is this idea that America is fundamentally, incurably racist. That racism is so embedded in America's DNA that black people will never be accepted as equals. That no matter what we do, we won't be accepted as equals. And so this approach says maybe we should just accept that. And black people basically need their own country. Now, there are less extreme versions of this. Some people will say no, they may not ready to lead the country, but they want to at least control their own communities, or in fact, or they just control their own institutions. But in other words, we want a space that we control away from them, because we will never be accepted on an equal basis. So this tension is oftentimes existed. So black nationalism is a real thing. So for example, Marcus Garvey, for example, wasn't the first person to talk about going back to Africa. You know, when Marcus Garvey was talking about that in 1920s, that was part of a tradition of black thought. There were black people talking about that in the 1830s. There were black people talking about that in the 1850s. So a lot of this is not new. And in fact, nationalist thought or separatist thought, those kinds of thoughts, tend to be strongest in periods in American history when black people are particularly hopeless. Or it could be, for example, that things have happened where black people had some expectations, where there was some progress that was being made, and then it was reversed, where things seemed to be getting worse for black people. For example, the 1850s was one of those episodes where it appeared that things were not getting better, but it was actually getting worse. That despite decades of abolitionist agitation, things were actually getting worse. That Congress had passed a Fugitive Slave Act. They were tightening down. The slaveholders seemed more powerful than ever. Now we know now that slavery, that within the next 10 to 15 years, there's going to be a civil war, and slavery will come to an end. But they didn't know that. They didn't, just like there are things that we're going through now that we don't know how it's going to turn out. There'll be people who will be reading, God said the same. Jesus don't come back before then. Okay, there'll be people who will be reading about what we were experiencing 20, 30, 40 years from now. They didn't know these things were going to happen. So these are two ways of thinking about it. These two, and they have their uses, but they actually may be too limiting. So what I want to do, spend the rest of my time talking about, is to kind of go through some particular strategies that black people have used at different times. Sometimes these strategies can fit in either one of these traditions. Sometimes they don't fit in either one real neatly. But the idea is to try to talk about some of the different ranges of things that black people have tried or have pursued in order to try to deal with that predicament. So that's what I like to do to spend the rest of my time. And by the way, y'all can jump in, ask, make a comment, ask a question. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. That's just what we do. So, okay. So let me talk through some of these things that black people have done to try to try to deal with a circumstance. One of those, armed struggle. Obviously the most overt thing black people have done, is to physically try to take their freedom, armed struggle. Now, historians have often downplayed the number of slave rebellions. That's not coincidental. Historians have often downplayed the number of slave rebellions. That's part of the Southern lost cause narrative, this idea that slavery really wasn't that bad. And in fact, slaveholders were saying, well, my slaves are happy. Don't you hear them singing? They're singing about how to kill the master. That's what they're thinking about. Don't you hear them singing? But in fact, historians have often downplayed the number of slave rebellions. I just mentioned a few. A major slave rebellion in South Carolina, 1739. There was a huge conspiracy see in New York in 1741, keep in mind that slavery was legal in all 13 of the colonies, prior to the Revolution. Actually, one of the biggest slave revolts happened right here in Louisiana. Sometimes referred to as the German Coast Rebellion in 1811. Right here, So if you go to the Whitney plantation, they have a marker, that commemorates that. And when they, of course, after they apprehended, the slave people who were involved in that, they brutally executed a lot of them, and they beheaded them and put their heads on spikes. They lined the road with the people that they had murdered as a symbol, as a method of terror. This is what's going to happen to you if you rebel. Of course, Nat Turner is probably one of the most famous rebellions in 1831. In Virginia. And this doesn't account, of course, some of the rebellions or conspiracies that, almost took place, but somebody snitched. Denmark Vesey's conspiracy in Charleston in 1822 was one example of those. And, and it was designed to coincide with Bastille Day, July 14th, that was, 14th, the French Revolution, and it was actually one of the most well-planned conspiracies of all of them, but somebody at the last minute decided to betray them. And they were going to mess some stuff up. And they might, of course, they probably would have eventually got caught, but some white folks would have got messed up in the process. By the way, when Dylan Roof in 2015, went into the Mother Emanuel Church prior, and basically killed those 9 people, he knew exactly what he was doing. See, Denmark Vesey was a member of that church. That's the oldest AME church in the South. Dylan Roof knew that history. That's why he did what he did. So, sometimes our enemies know our history better than us. And also, some of these rebellions, particularly, for example, I mentioned the German Coast Rebellion, they were inspired by the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution is actually what inspired some of these rebellions. Of course, at the same time, it scared the heck out of white folks. It is not an accident that the United States did not recognize Haiti's independence until 1863, almost 60 years after they drove Napoleon off the island. Well, there's a whole there's a whole legacy of what's been done to Haiti after they became independent. That we got into that will take us sideways, but definitely. But for certainly armed struggle has been one of the traditions. So when people think about guys like the Black Panthers, understand that there's a tradition there's a tradition in our communities of armed struggles. That's one idea. A second idea is second approach is what we're going to call Black Exodus. This idea of Black Exodus. Running away from white folks, running away from white oppressors, has been a fundamental part of Black resistance since the dawn of slavery. And and you obviously know the risks that were associated with that. With that. But it goes beyond. But it goes beyond simply those slaves who tried to run away to attain their freedom. Sometimes it manifests after slavery in black people picking up with their feet. So for example, after Reconstruction, and black people see their rights being reversed, the gains as being reversed. Some people started to move to Kansas. There was a movement. There was a Kansas movement, Exodus movement. One of the reasons, some of you familiar with what happened in Tulsa, the Tulsa race riot, 1920. Well, a lot of those people who originally settled in Tulsa, black people, were people who had left the South because the conditions of black people had deteriorated to the point where black people were looking to move somewhere else. Or maybe we establish our own black towns. That's the idea. Black people trying to get somewhere the white people are not. And then of course, I think there was a larger, Great Migration, where, in 1900, there were 90% of black people in the United States still live in the South. By 1950, 50% had left. By 1950, 50% had left the South, moved to northern cities and western cities, oftentimes chasing opportunity. And sometimes they did find some opportunities. Of course, they did not find the promised land. The racism was very alive and well in the North, as it was in the other parts of the country. But again, this is also a form of exodus. Of black people picking up and leaving, looking for opportunity in other places. Sometimes it manifested in people wanting to get out of this country. Many of your Back to Africa movements. Like again, I mentioned Marcus Garvey wasn't the first person to come up with this idea. But this idea of getting out, moving away. Martin Delaney was talking about this idea in the 1850s. Most time it was Africa. Sometimes it was other places. Sometimes it was Central America, South America. But the idea of getting away, leaving the United States. So exodus, leaving, that's a long tradition of that within Black America. So Black exodus is one idea. There are also less direct means of resistance. A lot of times when we think about slavery, sometimes, and when we think about people resisting, what obviously comes to mind is people running away. It's one form of resistance. I'm reminded of watching Roots and Kunta Kinte, and a number of times he ran away, and it wasn't until he ran away until he couldn't run away anymore after they cut his foot. We think about other ways in which people resisted, but sometimes people resist it in less direct ways. Sometimes, I may not be able to oppose you directly, but I can get back at you in other ways. So people deliberately broke tools to slow down and work at the plantation sometimes. Again, it's not as direct, as a rebellion, but it's a way of getting back at the master. The master. Sometimes black people just play dumb. I don't know how to do that. Master, I don't know how to do that. And oftentimes that worked. Playing on white people's own racism, you can get out of doing something. That may not, again, that may not be as glamorous as other methods, but it's a form of resistance. You know, when people sneaked to learn how to read, uh, Frederick Douglass talks about this in his autobiography. He was a little young boy who was working in the house, and his mistress was teaching him to read a little bit. And of course, her husband found out about it, and so he was giving her this lecture about how foolish that was. You shouldn't be teaching slaves how to read because, see, education doesn't befit a man to be a slave. Well, he didn't realize that Frederick Douglass overheard him. And so that stuck with him in his mind. So, well, if this is something that the master doesn't want me to have, then I'll say more. Again, these little acts, sometimes sneaking to learn a little bit here, learn a little bit there, that's a form of resistance that oftentimes people don't think about. And of course, the slaves cook the master's food. I think somebody been watching The Help. I think somebody, you just might want to grind up a little glass or something and put it in there, people's food. I was reminded of once again thinking about Roots again. At the end of one of the episodes, Kizzy now is an old woman, and this little white girl she used to play with, when she was younger. Now she's older, and her carriage happens to come on the road, and she notices her, and she recognizes her. Of course, Missy Ann pretends that she doesn't know who she is. A lot of us have had that feeling, white folks like they don't know who you are. You know who I am. Yeah. And she said, I don't know a nigger by that name. Give me a glass of water. All right, I got your water. So I got your water. She went and got that water and spit at it. Let's see. I may not get you directly, but there are little ways that we can get back at you. Get back at you. So sometimes we pursue less direct means of resistance, but it's resistance nonetheless. Okay. So that's one tradition I wanted to mention. Then the next thing I want to talk about is how we have tended to co-opt American ideals. We have a tendency to co-opt American ideas. Black people have always used America's founding principles to pursue equality. In fact, we have used the very things that they claim to believe in and use them against us. You think about when Dr. King gave the "I Have a Dream," for example. If you actually read the text of that speech, he quotes from the Declaration of Independence. He appeals to the Constitution of the United States. He also quotes. He also makes reference to the Emancipation Proclamation. These founding documents. All right. and he uses these founding documents, to then argue that you are not being consistent with what you say you believe. But King wasn't the first black person to do that. Black people have been doing that from the very beginning. In 1773, there was a black person by the name of Felix Holbrook. I'm sure you've heard of him, right? In Massachusetts. And keep in mind, Massachusetts is right in the heartbeat of all of this agitation between the British Crown and the colonists. You got the Sons of Liberty, who have been talking about all these about what the British have done. They had the Boston Massacre. You had the Boston Tea Party, and so all this language about liberty and equality and natural rights is happening. And black people, keep in mind, black people have been in the country by this time for 100 years. So nowadays, black people have taken on English names, English language, English religions. They've become, well, they're not Americans yet, but in a lot of ways. And so he petitions the Massachusetts colonial legislature. And he says, basically, black people have been listening in on this conversation. And says, your claims about natural rights, we agree with you. But if you really believe those things, why do you maintain slavery right here in the colony of Massachusetts? So again, this idea of taking these values of Americans claim to believe. David Walker, when he writes his appeal to the colored citizens of the world, he is, in some ways, he's rebutting Thomas Jefferson, who, on one hand, talks about liberty and equality, but then he writes this book called Notes on the State of Virginia, in which he talks about how black people are inferior. So I guess because they're inferior, I guess they can't have the same rights. And then, basically, David Walker says, but are we not men? Because if we are, and of course we are, then we're entitled to the same rights. Or you're a hypocrite, and you can't call this country Christian. So whether it's him, whether it's Frederick Douglass, on and on again, black people have had the tradition where we co-opt American ideals for, in advance our cause. Now, oftentimes people will say, well, but that was never really intended for us. So why should we do this? What's the point in doing this? And see, one of the problems we have with this is this. We focus too much in this country about the original intent of the framers. You've turned the framers into gods, deities, and people try to figure out what the framers' intent was and try to get into the framers' mind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As if it's our version of ancestor worship.
Freedom for me, but not for thee.
But here, and we have these arguments about what do they really mean when they said all men are created equal, and and there's a whole lot of historical debates about this, and that's interesting, but it's irrelevant. Here's why. Because sometimes in history, what matters is not what people intended. What matters is what they did, is what they said, Because, see, the problem with ideas is that they have consequences. And sometimes they have consequences that extend well beyond what people intended. It does not matter that they did not intend or what they meant when they said all men are created equal. The problem is they shouldn't have said it. Because the fact that they said it, whether they believed it or not, whether they thought it applied to some people and not other people, the fact that they said it means that every generation of Americans who believed that they were legitimately excluded from the we the people would be able to go back to the Declaration of Independence, would be able to go to the Constitution of the United States and to simply say, me too. So it don't matter what they intended. Right, right. They, so we have been, so every group, not just black people, women. They said, at the Seneca Falls Convention, they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. So it don't matter what they intended. You didn't mean it, you shouldn't have said it. You shouldn't have said it. Because it has given people something that they can go back to. America is one of those places in actually where the people who were the outgroups were actually able, because of what America claimed it believed in, to use the same documents that America claimed to believe in. Other societies, people had to create a whole nother ideology to justify why they should be free. Or why they had a right to challenge the status quo. In America, those who were the outgroups could use the same document that the people in power claimed to believe in. That's one of the things about America that's unique in that regard. So this idea of co-opting American ideals, this idea of taking what may have not been intended for us and using it for us, that has been a hallmark of black resistance. So in addition to some of the things we already said, co-opting American ideals and, armed struggle, less direct means, co-opting American ideas is one of the ideas we come with. So that's another approach. Now, another strategy of black people is simply to reject America in its entirety. Some African Americans have rejected this country in its entirety. Malcolm X, for example, famously said, "I'm not an American. I'm a victim of America." I'm not an American, I'm a victim of America. Pan-Africanism, or people who call themselves Afrocentrists, oftentimes they reject America as well. They identify with the African diaspora, or they identify with African history or African cultures, and they may take on African names, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's one of the ways black people have responded to that situation is by rejecting America. Malcolm X at the time would say, "I'm not American. I'm just a victim of America. I don't know why would I want to integrate into this?" There have been some black people who were Marxists. you know, or they embrace socialism. You know, love socialism. So when you, for example, when you reject capitalism, there's hardly anything that's more American than capitalism. So when you embrace Marxism, you embrace capitalism, you are rejecting one of America's very core tenets. So rejecting America in its entirety. Now, one thing we need to say about Marxism and socialism, just for a point. Every black liberation movement at some point has been accused of being Marxist and socialism. Now, most of the time, that's a slander. Okay. In other words, the idea of white supremacy is so ingrained that any attempt by black people to gain equality is communism. They were, in the 1860s, 1870s, they were accusing black people who were just simply fighting for the right to get paid fairly for their wages, coming out of slavery, of the notion that black people have the audacity to demand how to organize themselves to be paid fairly for their labor was considered by white folks to be communist. They actually used the word communism to describe that. So a lot of movements, there are a whole number of movements that black people have, that have nothing to do with communism, but they're called communists. Because if you can call in America, there's probably nothing that's more un-American, quote unquote, than to call something communist. So if you can call something communist, and if you can repeat that charge over and over and over again, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. If you can believe it. And so if you can label a movement as communist, it's a way to delegitimize it. So we ain't got to listen to those people because they're communists. They're not real Americans. They're trying to destroy the American experiment. So you just wanting to get a decent wage, you're a communist. You just want to have the law to apply equally to you. You're a communist. Really? So one of the ways that black people have responded to that situation is to simply reject Americans entirely. And some black people have done that in its entirety. Another approach is by black people has been to make use of the courts. Making use of the courts, this scene is from May 17th, 1954, almost 70 years now. Will be later this year. We will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the decision of Brown versus the Board of Education. So the NAACP, you think about that was the culmination of a 20-year campaign to get to this point to finally overturn separate but equal. However, when the NAACP did this, they were not the first group of people to use the law to try to push the cause of black equality. Black people have always used the law and use the law as a way, as a tool to try to advance freedom or to advance their causes. And sometimes, and oftentimes, the law or the courts were not just a way, and sometimes was the only practical way sometimes for black people to use to vindicate their rights. There was a black woman in the colony of Virginia who sued for freedom. This is the 1650s, and at the time, and she actually won. She actually won. She was the product of a interracial union. Her, the slave owner was a man who was her father, and she won the lawsuit. Because at the time, the status followed the father. And so because of that lawsuit, they changed the law. They changed the law so that the status followed the mother. So we've used the courts from the very beginning, sometimes successfully, as in Brown v. Board, sometimes unsuccessfully. Plessy versus Ferguson came out of Louisiana. That was a purposeful challenge to a state statute, the Separate Car Act that had been enacted by the Louisiana legislature. State Senator Murphy Foster, who became Governor Foster, who was the grandfather of later Mike Foster. That was a challenge, that was a purposeful challenge to that law. It failed. Dred Scott case was a challenge to the law. It failed. Using the legal system to try to vindicate our rights has been one of the approaches we've used. Sometimes it's succeeded, and sometimes it has not produced the results we would like. State of Louisiana is a very good example. Almost every time we have made some progress in the state, it has been because we had to sue the state of Louisiana. Many of you, some of you have probably been following the machinations, for example, about whether or not we're going to have a second majority congressional district. And it looks like that's going to happen, though there is a lawsuit challenging that district. So it may, there's still some more. That could still be overturned at some point. But right now, it looks like, at least for the 2024 election, there may be a second majority congressional black district. But it took a lawsuit to get there. The only reason there is a first congressional black district in New Orleans is because of a lawsuit. Louisiana also has the most elected judges of any state in the country, only because of a federal lawsuit. Louisiana didn't do it on its own. It didn't comply. It would refuse to comply. Louisiana has always made us have to sue them to do what's right. And even after they lost the lawsuit, they were still trying to figure out a way they could still undermine it. So they're not done, with that. But the point is that using the courts as a means to try to vindicate our rights, that is a long history, and it's a long tradition of that, and it looks like it's going to continue. We've got to continue to have to do that, especially considering how conservative the courts are. We're going to spend a whole lot of time for the foreseeable future in the courts to vindicate our rights. So, okay. Also, what I also like to do, in the process of talking about this, we need to have a shout out to the sisters. Um, Black women have always been at the center of the struggle for the liberation of black people. And so oftentimes, and we have to remember this, sometimes when we have these black history discussions, we have to broaden our understanding. Sometimes they've been treated as if there's this long procession of heroic black male leaders. But black women have been at the center of the struggle for black liberation from the very beginning. And oftentimes, their contributions to our history have been written out of the textbooks and written out of the history books. Just several examples. Ida B. Wells is one of my heroes. I mean, that was a bad sister. No, she was something else. I'm thinking about Elizabeth Freeman, who filed the lawsuit in Massachusetts in 1780 that brought down the institution of slavery in the colony of in the new state of Massachusetts. That she sued her master, who had actually been one of the patriot leaders in Massachusetts, and she won her lawsuit. And as a result of that, Massachusetts became the first state in the Union to abolish slavery. Actually, her name was something else. Elizabeth Freeman was the name she gave to herself after she won her freedom, because freedom meant I had the right to call myself by my own name. So we need to talk about these people. We need to talk about Maria Stewart, who was the first woman to speak publicly about politics, black or white, to a male audience. And she was fearless. We need to talk about Doretta Lee, who believes she was called to preach. And she traveled hundreds of thousands of miles preaching the gospel, oftentimes by herself. She was fearless. We need to talk about Sojourner Truth. We should talk about Mary Church Terrell. We should talk about Nanny Burroughs. We should talk about and Fannie Lou Hamer and Mary McLeod Bethune. So when we talk about the contributions of black history, we should talk about, when we talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, we need to remember that it was actually the Women's Political Council and people like Joanne Robinson who actually came up with the actual plan for the boycott. You should read Joanne Robinson's memoir, The Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Started It. So when we talk about our history, we need to make sure that we include what women have done in their history. And today, currently, it is black women who are the backbone of the Democratic Party. It is black women who are the backbone of the Democratic Party. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost, it ain't black women's fault. She got her highest vote total came from black women, 94% from black women. It was the white women. It was the white women who voted for Trump. And now, but I just can't trust her. She's such a crook. It's her emails. I just can't trust her. And some of the same people who are now upset about Roe v. Wade being overturned. But her emails, I just can't trust her. So let's not forget the sisters when we talk about our history. Okay. All right. Reparations. Reparations. Okay. From the very beginning, one of the most urgent demands that ex-slaves had was the desire for land. This is, in fact, General Sherman, after they had, driven the Southern Army to the sea, they were talking to some of these slaves in places like South Carolina and North Carolina. What do you need? Black people said they wanted land. In fact, he issued a military order that actually turned over some of the land they had confiscated to slaves. Black people were saying, give us land, and we'll take care of ourselves. And so, this idea of 40 acres and a mule, give us land, we'll take care of ourselves. And, there were a few advocates for this. Thaddeus Stevens, who, by the way, who is oftentimes forgotten, wanted to give slaves land. Congress wouldn't do it. We can't just give the slave land. That would upset property rights. Well, but you were giving free land to white folks. In 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act. And they were given 160 acres of land in the West to white folk. But they couldn't give 40 acres to the former slaves. Now, keep this in mind. This is a pattern. This is a pattern, of the state giving benefits to white folks, denying those same benefits to black folks. It didn't stop there. How about the New Deal? The New Deal. In 1933, the Federal Housing Administration was established as part of the New Deal. The federal government got into the mortgage business, guaranteeing loans. However, in the legislation, it defined racially integrated neighborhoods as an insurance risk. And so the practice of redlining, of drawing maps and redlining certain neighborhoods as these areas are too risky to lend. And so, segregation was already in existence, racism was already in existence, but the federal government is in some ways, is actually implicating itself, involving itself in what was already happening and in making things worse. And so if you can't get insurance for the house, can't get a mortgage, because the bank wants security that if you default, we're going to get our money. And so, not surprisingly, the first 30 years or so of the FHA program, only 2% of home loans went to black folks. And not only that, for developers, if you could not guarantee that the development was going to be all white, you couldn't get the federally backed mortgage guarantee. Richard Rothstein has a book about this and other matters. They call it The Color of Law. And he tells a story about, I think it was in California, there was this white guy, I think he was a professor at a local college, but he had a black colleague that he wanted to sell his house to. Well, of course, the neighbors went berserk, and they organized against it and raised all kind of sand. Make long story short, not only were they able to force the black family out of the house, but they actually banned the white guy from ever getting a FHA loan again. Because it said that you bought the house under false pretenses. Because you sold your house to a black person, you must have been trying to trick us.
The man in power defines the term.
Right. And so that's what happened. And that's what happened to him. So we can go on and on. I mean, if you think about the farm subsidy programs in the 1930s, somehow they gave subsidies to white farmers, denied subsidies to black farmers. Even Social Security, where the law was written, it purposely excluded two groups of workers: agricultural workers and domestic servants, black men and black women. That was in the law. That means there are people who worked for years and that nobody took Social Security out on them. They even denied black people welfare. Aid to families with dependent children started in 1936. They fixed it where you couldn't even get welfare because the program was administered by states, and the states made sure you didn't get it. And it wasn't until they couldn't legally deny you access to welfare that all of a sudden welfare became the root of all evil. GI Bill. Black folks fought in World War II, just like white folks did. White folks got the GI Bill. They were able to go to college, some of them for the first time. And VA loans, got home loans. Black folks got shafted. So this is this idea of black people getting some recompense. This idea that the problems didn't end when slavery ended. It's not just slavery that is the cause of the difference in status and wealth. It's also the things the government has done since slavery that explain why the wealth gap between black folk and white folk is as high as it is. That's 10, 11, 13 times, depending on which numbers you accept. So movements to try to gain some kind of reparation. Mary Frances Berry has a very good book about this, about Her Face is Black, My Face is Black is True. It's the story of a woman named Callie House. She was a washerwoman, okay, who basically put together a black pension organization in the late 19th, early 20th century, trying to get pensions for ex-slaves. around the same time, they were starting to give pensions to Confederate and Union war veterans. And black people said, why can't we get some pensions? Pensions. And this organization eventually had 200,000 members. Way more than NAACP ever had, and some other folks ever had. So movements like this radically change our ideas about who can lead. She's a washerwoman. She didn't have a degree. She wasn't Du Bois. And her story has largely been forgotten because she didn't write her story down. And of course, the government considered her a threat. And they accused her of mail fraud and put her in prison. She's a political prisoner. But so my point is that when this idea of reparations has gotten a lot of attention, particularly recently. I know a lot of Black Lives Matter people have brought this up issue over a lot. But again, that's a tradition. That's been a tradition. This is not new. This is not something that just came about during the 60s. That's been a tradition of Black people seeking some kind of recompense for what we have suffered.
Was the mail fraud allegation against Marcus Garvey, was it valid, or it's just another lie?
Probably not. Probably not. Again, but same thing. Marcus Garvey had a following of over 200,000 people. Following. In some ways, he was a much bigger threat than the NAACP ever was. Okay. Let's move. Okay. Let me move quickly. Because we're starting to run out of time. Black excellence. Black excellence is also a form of resistance. This idea, because white supremacy is based on this idea that white people are inherently superior. So when Black people achieve, whether it's in education, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in athletics, whether it's, achieving in the military, like, say, Colin Powell, becoming the first Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or things like this. In other words, whenever Black people do what white supremacy, white stereotypes about us say that we can't do, that's a form of resistance. When Black people use their intellect and their gifts and their art and what have you to advance the cause of their cause, so whether people who are historians or political scientists who use their intellect to study issues that are related to the race, whether it's hip-hop artists or other people who use their talent to highlight these issues, or athletes who use their platform. Again, LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick, that's not new. That's not new. That's what Muhammad Ali did. That's what Jackie Robinson did. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown, the brothers doing the Olympics. That's part of a tradition. So whenever we do what they say we can't do, and in the process, we've created whole new genres. In the process, there wouldn't be a whole lot of American culture without Black folks. Culture. Okay. And okay. I also want to highlight too the critical significance of the Black church. The critical significance of the Black church as also a part of this idea of resistance. Actually, when you think about Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, who were able to create the first independent Black congregation. That was a seminal victory. They actually had to sue to win the right to form an independent congregation. That's a very powerful precedent. Now, after slavery, it was kind of harder to do this in the South when black people were under the watch of their slave masters. But one of the first priorities of black people upon freedom was establishing their own churches. In fact, one scholar basically refers to these establishments as really a freedom movement. We had the opportunity to worship God free from white control. The black church created an independent space for black people, a space that black people controlled, and establishing that was foundational to much of what happened later. Many other movements became possible because there was an independent space that black people controlled. So, and the church and Christianity gave black people a vocabulary, a language that they could use to articulate what they were experiencing and make a case for why things ought to be different. And we often use religious references and analogies that they're oftentimes integrated within our politics. It's not an accident that Harriet Tubman is referred to as the Moses of her people. Sometimes black people referred to America as a kind of Egypt. Or the slave masters was Pharaoh. So this idea of integrating the political with the spiritual and the religious, and the church was the center of the black community. You could not go to the Rotary Club or the Lions Club or the Knights of Columbus, whatever. So the church was where the debutante balls were held. The church is where a lot of these other things that happened. The church became like a community center. It was a center of the black community. And it was the place where black people heard messages that affirmed their worth. And so when the world was telling black people and mowing them down in many ways, it was the black church that was telling them that you are beautiful and smart. So the black church created that space, and the black church created and the Christianity oftentimes is itself a theology of liberation. The Bible says in Galatians chapter 3, starting in verse 26, so in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. If God says that I am a child of God, that we're all sons of God. If God says that I have been created in his image and in his likeness, and that unlike Fred Sanford, that God is not in the junk business. If God says that he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, he did it for me. That at just the right time, when we were powerless, that Christ died for the ungodly, then that must mean that we matter. That must mean that we are important. And so if I have that value to God, and if I can now approach the throne with confidence, then why should I be unequal? Why are you entitled to rule? So Christianity is a theology of liberation. It's good news. He came to set the captives free. So what does all this history mean? And we got a few minutes. We're about to close this out here. What does all this history mean in the final analysis? Number one, black people have not always agreed on the best way to confront our predicament. Again, the beginning of black politics is that essential question of, we didn't ask to come here, now what do we do about it? We have not always been of one mind about how to deal with that. And if we haven't always been of one mind historically, why should we expect that we not disagree now? There are some people who insist that we must always agree, that we can't make progress unless we all agree. That's false. That's simply not true. It's also not possible. In fact, sometimes our disagreements are creative. And sometimes, in the case of Du Bois and Washington, sometimes they both had a point. So sometimes, just because somebody disagrees with you, they may actually have a point. But sometimes it is our insistence that we all must agree that has actually been at the root of some of our problems. It's okay for us to disagree, because we're not a monolith. Now, there are people, and it's a whole other discussion I ain't got time for. There are people who are Toms. There are people who are Toms.
Amen.
So we need to state that, just for the record. So there are people working against us who look like us. Yeah, right. So that's the first thing. So we have a tradition, number one. Now, secondly, we actually have a political tradition. We have a political tradition. And so a lot of solutions that are sometimes brand as new are actually old. People tried it before. It doesn't mean that we should just discard it. It means that we have a history to draw on, that we can learn and investigate and figure out what people did, what made sense, and what were the mistakes, and not repeat them. But it's important to know we do have a political tradition. Thirdly, the black church has played an irreplaceable role in creating an independent space for black folk. We have played an indispensable role in creating an independent space for black folks. And finally, black America can teach America a whole lot about what it means to love this country. Because black people have been wrestling with this two-ness and how do we love America that doesn't love us back? And we've done all these things. We've even worn this nation's uniform. There are black people who there were black people who fought in World War I, came home and got lynched in their uniforms.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So black people have had to wrestle with this. I'm not saying that we've done it perfectly, okay? But black people have often found a way to love America in spite of America. There's something magical and almost spiritual about when a black person sings the Pledge of Allegiance. You know, when you see Whitney Houston singing the Pledge of Allegiance, there's a something special about this because you get a glimpse of what God is like. Who, you know, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, when he had no reason to do it, Christ died for the ungodly. And he loves the unlovable. See, the problem we'll be dealing with today is there are people who say that we have to protect American history from those who would change it. Because they fear that if we tell the truth about our history, then our kids won't love our country. They won't love our country. But see, the problem with that, but that's the problem with that. And the problem is that if we tell the truth, we can tell the truth about our history and still find things in there to emulate. We can teach the great things that George Washington did, at the same time tell people he was a slaveholder. Those are not irreconcilable. We can do those things. Black people know how to love America in spite of itself. We have a lot to teach America about what it truly means to be patriotic. They're not patriotic. They don't really love America. They love an idea about America. We have much to teach America about what it truly means to love this country. Now, I want to, next time, what I want to talk about is Reconstruction. And Reconstruction, Episode 1 and the sequel. Episode 1 and the sequel. That will be our discussion for next time. I'm going to stop here. I got a couple of minutes before 8 o'clock. I'm going to ask Pastor Smith to come forward.
I am extremely pleased with what we have heard and what we have experienced here this evening, and I am extremely pleased with those who are here tonight. It's Valentine's Day and all that other stuff, and the fact that you were willing to put that aside in order to be here tonight speaks volumes, and I'm very, very grateful. May we stand together, please? Repeat after me, please. The Lord bless you.
Lord bless you.
The Lord keep you.
Lord keep you.
The Lord make his face shine upon you
Lord make his face shine upon you.
and give